All right, guys. So last time when we were doing Marvelous Land of Oz, we have Tip, who's with Mombi the witch, but Glenda doesn't allow anybody to be a witch, so she's a witch on the sly. You're not allowed to be a witch in Glinda's territory. Um, and so Tip, Tip is living with this lady, and basically is just like her servant. And Tip's a little rascally. Wants to play a trick on old Mombi. She went to go get some things, which we find out later is to do magic. And while she's out, she's going to be gone a couple days. And Tip makes a pumpkin head, bit taller than a real human being, but he thinks he does a pretty good job of making it look realistic. He wants to scare her, so he sets it up when she's going to be coming around the bend towards the home. And she gets there, and she goes to talk to the pumpkin head. It doesn't so much scare her; she just thinks it's a person. And then she's like, "Ah, what the hell?" It's like, "All right, Tip, I see you, Tip. We're gonna backfire this. I've got this basically potion. I mean, this powder that's gonna make things come alive. We're gonna turn this prank around on you." And Tip happens up while this is happening and watches the whole thing goes down. And she does 3 words and some finger motions and throws the powder on this thing, and the pumpkin head comes alive. And Tip had already named it Jack Pumpkinhead, and now the thing's alive, and she's doing a jig. Frickin' Tip starts laughing and whatnot, and she's like, "I'm going to show you," and so like they end up going back to the house. And she starts brewing this potion. She had locked up Jack in the stable, and he's like, "What are you doing? What are you making?" He's like, "Well, I'm making a potion to turn you into a statue." And it's gonna brew overnight, and in the morning we're gonna make you a statue. He's like, "But you won't have anybody to do your stuff." And he's like, "Well, we made Jack Pumpkin. He's gonna be my servant, and you're gonna be my statue, and I'm gonna make a nice little garden right around you. It's going to be great." Tip doesn't really like this idea, so he's going to run off, and he doesn't like leaving Jack with Mombi. So he ends up stealing some things that he needs, like bread and whatnot, and he ends up taking the little pepper shaker of potion that will, with the animation powder, and he goes and frees Jack's, and they go on the run, and they're talking and everything, and he lets Jack know that he created him, and he hopes he did a good job and whatnot, and he's kind of teaching him about what some words mean and some things mean, and they get up to he's Tip is sitting on this sawhorse. And he's like, "What's that?" And he's like, "It's a horse." And he's like, "Well, what's a horse?" And then like Tip tells him about like actual horses. And he's like, "Oh, so you ride that thing?" And he's like, "Well, no, this is a sawhorse." He's like, "But it could be a horse." And so they use the powder, and he does the hand signals and the words, and the sawhorse comes to life. And after a little bit of work, they end up putting a peg for a saddle horn into the sawhorse's back, and they end up giving it some ears. And they're going to have Jack ride on the sawhorse, and Tip follow behind. And they're gonna make their way to the Emerald City. And so they get to the river close to the Emerald City, but they don't have any money for the ferryman. And the ferryman's basically like, it's cost this much. And he's like, well, we don't have any money. And he's like, well, then kindly F off. And he's like, well, what am I going to do? And he's like, you could, he's like, that sawhorse will float. You could just ride that. And he's like, not a bad idea. And so they do that. And they come out soaking wet, and they figure out that, like, if they get the sawhorse kind of running, they'll be able to dry off. And the sawhorse, as they had told him, they had to, learn him some words. When they got to learning him, they said that whoa meant to stop, and get up meant to start, walking. And trot meant to go as fast as you can. And so they were, he said, get up, and they're going, and Tip's holding the tail. Jack's on the sawhorse. And they say, at one point he's like, well, we could go faster. We can dry off and whatnot. And he's like, trot. And the sawhorse is like, oh, yeah, that means go as fast as I can. And he takes off. And Tip's holding on for dear life. And the tail is just like a stick. And he can't say whoa because he can't even catch his breath. He's like fighting for his life, basically. And then the stick breaks off. And by the time Tip catches his breath and is going to say whoa, the horse and Jack are already, like, gone. And he's like, well, once they get to the gates, they won't be able to get in, so he's like, let me take a little nap, catch my breath here. I'm going to rest up, and then I'll start walking. And so that's what he does. He takes a little nap, and he gets to walking. And the sawhorse and Jack get to the Emerald City, and the doorman's like, yo, what's up? And he's like, I don't know. He's like, well, are you a man or a pumpkinhead? He's like, both, I think. And he's like, is your buddy alive? And the sawhorse stomps on his foot, and he's like, I shouldn't have asked that, but that is an affirmative. Okay. And he's like, well, I think we have a job to do here or something, but, like, my father's not here, but I'm pretty sure I'm supposed to go here and get in, do something. And the doorman's like, well, this is a crazy story, but you seem like a bunch of nice people. He's like nobody who smiles as much as you do could be up to mischief. And he's like, well, actually, that's just my carved out face. This is the only face I can make. He's like, well, okay then. Anyways, let's go. And they go in, and they dismount. Jack dismounts, and they're going in to see the Scarecrow, who runs the city. And so that's where we kind of ended. Mombi left behind. Tip in the distance with a ways to go. He's in the Emerald City land, but he's not at the Emerald City. He's got a bit to go. He's walking. And we got Jack Pumpkinhead and the Sawhorse in the Emerald City, past the gates. The Marvelous Land of Oz by L. Frank Baum. His Majesty the Scarecrow. I suppose every reader of this book knows what a scarecrow is, but Jack Pumpkinhead, never having seen such a creation, was more surprised at meeting the remarkable king of the Emerald City than by any other one experience of his brief life. His Majesty the Scarecrow was dressed in a suit of faded blue clothes, and his head was merely a small sack stuffed with straw, upon which eyes, ears, a nose, and a mouth had been rudely painted to represent a face. The clothes were also stuffed with straw, and that so unevenly or carelessly that His Majesty's legs and arms seemed more bumpy than was necessary. Upon his hands were gloves with long fingers, and these were padded with cotton. Wisps of straw stuck out from the monarch's coat and also from his neck and boot tops. Upon his head he wore a heavy golden crown, set thick with sparkling jewels, and the weight of this crown caused his brow to sag in wrinkles, giving a thoughtful expression to the painted face. Indeed, the crown alone betokened majesty. In all else, the Scarecrow King was but a simple scarecrow, flimsy, awkward, and unsubstantial. But if the strange appearance of His Majesty the Scarecrow seemed startling Jack, no less wonderful was the form of the Pumpkinhead to the Scarecrow. The purple trousers and pink waistcoat and red shirt hung loosely over the wooden joints Tip had manufactured, and the carved face on the pumpkin grinned perpetually as if its wearer considered life the jolliest thing imaginable. At first, indeed, His Majesty thought his queer visitor was laughing at him, and was inclined to resent such a liberty. But it was not without reason that the Scarecrow had attained the reputation of being the wisest personage in the land of Oz. He made a more careful examination of his visitor, and soon discovered that Jack's features were carved into a smile, and that he could not look grave if he wished to. The king was the first to speak. After regarding Jack for some minutes, he said in a tone of wonder, "Where on earth do you come from? And how do you happen to be alive?" "I beg your Majesty's pardon," returned the Pumpkinhead, "but I do not understand you." "What don't you understand?" asked the Scarecrow. "Why, I don't understand your language. You see, I come from the country of the Gillikins, so that I am a foreigner." "Ah, to be sure," exclaimed the Scarecrow. "I myself speak the language of the Munchkins, which is also the language of the Emerald City. But you, I suppose, speak the language of the Pumpkinheads?" "Exactly so, your Majesty," replied the other, bowing. "So it will be impossible for us to understand one another." That is unfortunate, certainly," said the Scarecrow thoughtfully. "We must have an interpreter." "What is an interpreter?" asked Jack. "A person who understands both my language and your own. When I say anything, the interpreter can tell you what I mean, and when you say anything, the interpreter can tell me what you mean, for the interpreter can speak both languages as well as understand them." "That is certainly clever," said Jack, greatly pleased at finding so simple a way out of the difficulty. So the Scarecrow commanded the soldier with the green whiskers to search among his people until he found one who understood the language of the Gillikins as well as the language of the Emerald City, and to bring that person to him at once. When the soldier had departed, the Scarecrow said, "Won't you take a chair while we are waiting?" "Your Majesty forgets that I cannot understand you," replied the Pumpkinhead. "If you wish me to sit down, you must make a sign for me to do so." The Scarecrow came down from his throne and rolled an armchair to a position behind the Pumpkinhead. Then he gave Jack a sudden push that sent him sprawling upon the cushions in so awkward a fashion that he doubled up like a jackknife and had hard work to untangle himself. "Did you understand that sign?" asked His Majesty, politely. "Perfect!" declared Jack, reaching up his arms to turn his head to the front, the pumpkin having twisted around upon the stick that supported it. "You seem hastily made," remarked the Scarecrow, watching Jack's efforts to straighten himself. "Not more so than your Majesty," was the frank reply. "There is this difference between us," said the Scarecrow, "that whereas I will bend but not break, you will break but not bend." At this moment the soldier returned, leading a young girl by the hand. She seemed very sweet and modest, having a pretty face and beautiful green eyes and hair. A dainty green silk skirt reached to her knees, showing silk stockings embroidered with pea pods, and green satin slippers with bunches of lettuce for decorations instead of bows or buckles. Upon her silken waist clover leaves were embroidered, and she wore a jaunty little jacket trimmed with sparkling emeralds of a uniform size. "Why, it's little Jellia Jam!" exclaimed the Scarecrow, as the Green Maiden bowed her pretty head before him. "Do you understand the language of the Gillikins, my dear?" "Yes, your Majesty," she answered, "for I was born in the North Country." "Then you shall be our interpreter," said the Scarecrow, "and explain to this Pumpkinhead all that I say, and also explain to me all that he says. Is this arrangement satisfactory?" he asked, turning towards his guest. "Very satisfactory indeed," was the reply. "Then ask him, to begin with," resumed the Scarecrow, turning to Jellia. "What brought him to the Emerald City?" But instead of this, the girl, who had been staring at Jack, said to him, "You are certainly a wonderful creature. Who made you?" "A boy named Tip," answered Jack. "What does he say?" inquired the Scarecrow. "My ears must have deceived me. What did he say?" "He says that your Majesty's brains seem to have come loose," replied the girl, demurely. The Scarecrow moved uneasily upon his throne and felt of his head with his left hand. "What a fine thing it is to understand 2 different languages," he said, with a perplexed sigh. "Ask him, my dear, if he has any objection to being put in jail for insulting the ruler of the Emerald City." "I didn't insult you," protested Jack indignantly. "Tut-tut," cautioned the Scarecrow. "Wait until Jellia translates my speech. What have we got an interpreter for if you break out in this rash way?" "All right, I'll wait," replied the Pumpkinhead, in a surlier tone, although his face smiled as genially as ever. "Translate the speech, young woman." "His Majesty inquires if you are hungry," said Jellia. "Oh, not at all," answered Jack, more pleasantly, "for it is impossible for me to eat." "It's the same way with me," remarked the Scarecrow. "What did he say, Jellia, my dear?" "He asked if you were aware that one of your eyes is painted larger than the other," said the girl, mischievously. "Don't you believe her, your Majesty?" cried Jack. "Oh, I don't," answered the Scarecrow, calmly. Then, casting a sharp look at the girl, he asked, "Are you quite certain you understand the languages of both the Gillikins and the Munchkins?" "Quite certain, your Majesty," said Jellia Jam, trying hard not to laugh in the face of royalty. "Then how is it that I seem to understand them myself?" inquired the Scarecrow. "Because they are one and the same," declared the girl, now laughing merrily. "Does not your Majesty know that all in the land of Oz but one language is spoken?" "Is it indeed so?" cried the Scarecrow, much relieved to hear this. "Then I might easily have been my own interpreter." "It was all my fault, your Majesty," said Jack, looking rather foolish. "I thought we must surely speak different languages since we come from different countries." "This should be a warning for you never to think," returned the Scarecrow severely. "For unless one can think wisely, it is better to remain a dummy, which you most certainly are." "I am! I surely am!" agreed the Pumpkinhead. "It seems to me," continued the Scarecrow, more mildly, "that your manufacturer spoiled some good pies to create an indifferent man." "I assure your Majesty that I did not ask to be created," answered Jack. "Ah, "It was the same in my case," said the king, pleasantly. "And so, as we differ from all ordinary people, let us become friends." "With all my heart!" exclaimed Jack. "What? Have you a heart?" asked the Scarecrow, surprised. "No, that was only imaginative. I might say a figure of speech," said the other. "Well, your most prominent figure seems to be a figure of wood, so I must beg you to restrain an imagination which, having no brains, you have no right to exercise," suggested the Scarecrow warningly. "To be sure," said Jack, without in the least comprehending. His Majesty then dismissed Jelly Jam and the soldier with the green whiskers, and when they were gone he took his new friend by the arm and led him to the courtyard to play a game of quoits. General Jinjur's Army of Revolt. Tip was so anxious to rejoin his man Jack and the Sawhorse that he walked a full half the distance to the Emerald City without stopping to rest. Then he discovered he was hungry, and the crackers and cheese he had provided for the journey had all been eaten. While wondering what he should do in this emergency, he came upon a girl sitting by the roadside. She wore a costume that struck the boy as being remarkably brilliant, her silken waistcoats being of emerald green and her skirt of 4 distinct colors: blue in front, yellow at the left side, red at the back, and purple at the right side. Fastening the waist in front were 4 buttons, the top one blue, the next yellow, a third red, and the last purple. The splendor of this dress was almost barbaric, so Tip was fully justified in staring at the gown for some moments before his eyes were attracted by the pretty face above it. Yes, the face was pretty enough, he decided, but it wore an expression of discontent coupled to the shade of defiance or audacity. While the boy stared, the girl looked upon him calmly. A lunch basket stood beside her, and she held a dainty sandwich in one hand and a hard-boiled egg in the other, eating with an evident appetite that aroused Tip's sympathy. He was just about to ask a share of the luncheon when the girl stood up and brushed the crumbs from her lap. "There," said she. "It is time for me to go. Carry that basket for me, and help yourself to its contents if you are hungry." Tip seized the basket eagerly and began to eat, following for a time the strange girl without bothering to ask questions. She walked along before him with swift strides, and there was about her an air of decision and importance that led him to suspect she was some great personage. Finally, when he had satisfied his hunger, he ran up beside her and tried to keep pace with her swift footsteps, a very difficult feat, for she was much taller than he and evidently in a hurry. "Thank you very much for the sandwiches," said Tip as he trotted along. "May I ask your name?" "I am General Jinjur," was the brief reply. "Oh," said the boy, surprised. "What sort of general?" "I command the army of Revolt in this war," answered the general, with unnecessary sharpness. "Oh!" he again exclaimed. I didn't know there was a war." "You are not supposed to know it," she returned, "for we have kept it a secret, and considering that our army is composed entirely of girls," she added, with some pride, "it is surely a remarkable thing that our revolt is not yet discovered." "It is indeed," acknowledged Tip. "But where is your army?" "About a mile from here," said General Jinjur. "The forces have assembled from all parts of the land of Oz at my express command, for this is the day we are to conquer His Majesty the Scarecrow and wrest from him the throne. The army of Revolt only awaits my coming to march upon the Emerald City." "Well," declared Tip, drawing a long breath, "this is certainly a surprising thing. May I ask why you wish to conquer His Majesty the Scarecrow?" "Because the Emerald City has been ruled by men long enough, for one reason," said the girl. "Moreover, the city glitters and
beautiful gems, which might far better be used for rings and bracelets and necklaces, and there is enough money in the king's treasury to buy every girl in our army a dozen new gowns, so we intend to conquer the city and run the government to suit ourselves."
Jinjur spoke these words with an eagerness and decision that proved she was in earnest.
"But war is a terrible thing," said Tip thoughtfully. "This war will be pleasant," replied the girl cheerfully. "Many of you will be slain," continued the boy in an awed voice. "Oh, no," said Jinjur. "What man would oppose a girl or dare her to harm her? And there is not an ugly face in my entire army."
Tip laughed.
"Perhaps you are right," said he. "But the guardian of the gate is considered a faithful guardian, and the king's army will not let the city be conquered without a struggle." "The army is old and feeble," replied General Jinjur scornfully. "His strength has all been used to grow whiskers, and his wife has such a temper that she has already pulled more than half of them out by the roots. When the wonderful wizard reigned, the soldier with the green whiskers was a very good royal army, for people feared the wizard. But no one is afraid of the Scarecrow, so his royal army don't count for much in time of war."
After this conversation, they proceeded some distance in silence, and before long reached a large clearing in the forest where fully 400 young women were assembled. These were laughing and talking together as gaily as if they had gathered for a picnic instead of a war of conquest. They were divided into 4 companies, and Tip noticed that all were dressed in costumes similar to that worn by General Jinjur. The only real difference was that while those girls from the Munchkin country had the blue strip in front of their skirts, those from the country of the Quadlings had the red strip in front. Those from the country of the Winkies had the yellow strip in front, and the Gillikin girls wore the purple strip in front. All had green waists, representing the Emerald City they intended to conquer, and the top button on each waist indicated by its color which country the wearer came from. The uniforms were jaunty and becoming, and quite effective when massed together. Tip thought this strange army bore no weapons whatever, but in this he was wrong, for each girl had stuck through the knot of her back hair 2 long, glittering knitting needles. General Jinjur immediately mounted the stump of a tree and addressed the army.
"Friends, fellow citizens and girls," she said, "we are about to begin our great revolt against the men of Oz. We march to conquer the Emerald City, to dethrone the Scarecrow King, to acquire thousands of gorgeous gems, to rifle the royal treasury, and to obtain power over our former oppressors."
"Hurrah!" said those who had listened, but Tip thought that most of the army was much too engaged in chattering to pay attention to the words of the general. The command to march was now given, and the girls formed themselves into 4 bands or companies and set off with eager strides towards the Emerald City. The boy followed after them, carrying several baskets and wraps and packages which various members of the army of Revolt had placed in his care. It was not long before they came to the green granite walls of the city and halted before the gateway. The guardian of the gate at once came out and looked at them curiously, as if a circus had come to town. He carried a bunch of keys swung around his neck by a golden chain. His hands were thrust carelessly into his pockets, and he seemed to have no idea at all that the city was threatened by rebels. Speaking pleasantly to the girls, he said, "Good morning, my dears. What can I do for you?"
"Surrender instantly,"
answered General Jinjur, standing before him and frowning as terribly as her pretty face would allow her to. "Surrender?" echoed the man, astounded. "Why, it's impossible. It's against the law. I never heard of such a thing in my life."
"Still, you must surrender," exclaimed the general fiercely. "We are revolting."
"You don't look it," said the guardian, gazing from one to another admiringly.
"But we are," cried Jinjur, stamping her foot impatiently.
and we mean to conquer the Emerald City."
"Good gracious!" returned the surprised guardian of the gates. "What a nonsensical idea! Go home to your mothers, my good girls, and milk the cows and bake the bread. Don't you know it's a dangerous thing to conquer a city?"
"We are not afraid," responded the general, and she looked so determined that it made the guardian uneasy. So he rang the bell for the soldier with the green whiskers, and the next minute was sorry he had done so, for immediately he was surrounded by a crowd of girls who drew their knitting needles from their hair and began jabbing them at the guardian with the sharp points dangerously near his fat cheeks and blinking eyes. The poor man howled loudly for mercy and made no resistance when Jinjur drew the bunch of keys from around his neck. Followed by her army, the general now rushed to the gateway, where she was confronted by the Royal Army of Oz, which was the other name for the soldier with the green whiskers.
"Halt!"
he cried, and pointed his long gun full in the face of their leader. Some of the girls screamed and ran back, but General Jinjur bravely stood her ground and said reproachfully, "Why, how now? Would you shoot a poor defenseless girl?"
"No," replied the soldier, "for my gun isn't loaded."
"Not loaded?"
"No, for fear of accidents, and I've forgotten where I hit the powder and shot to load it with, but if you'll wait a short time, I'll try to hunt them up."
"Don't trouble yourself," said Jinjur cheerfully. Then she turned to the army and cried, "Girls, the gun isn't loaded."
"Hooray!"
shrieked the rebels, delighted at this good news, and they proceeded to rush upon the soldier with the green whiskers in such a crowd that it was a wonder they didn't stick the knitting needles into one another. But the Royal Army of Oz was much too afraid of women to meet the onslaught. He simply turned about and ran with all his might through the gate and toward the royal palace, while General Jinjur and her mob flocked into the unprotected city. It was this way the Emerald City captured, without a drop of blood being spilled. The army of Revolt had become an army of conquerors. The Scarecrow plans an escape. Tip slipped away from the girls and followed swiftly after the soldier with the green whiskers. The invading army entered the city more slowly, for they stopped to dig emeralds out of the walls and paving stones with the point of their knitting needles. So the soldier and the boy reached the palace before the news had spread that the city was conquered. The Scarecrow and Jack Pumpkinhead were still playing at quoits in the courtyard when the game was interrupted by the abrupt entrance of the Royal Army of Oz, who came flying in without his hat or gun, his clothes in sad disarray and his long beard floating a yard behind him as he ran. "Tally one for me," said the Scarecrow calmly. "What's wrong, my man?" he added, addressing the soldier.
"Oh, your majesty, your majesty, the city is conquered,"
gasped the royal army, who was all out of breath. "This is quite sudden," said the Scarecrow. "But please go and bar all the doors and windows of the palace while I show this Pumpkinhead how to throw a quoit." The soldier hastened to do this, while Tip, who had arrived at the heels, remained in the courtyard to look at the Scarecrow with wondering eyes. His Majesty continued to throw the quoits as coolly as if no danger threatened his throne, but the Pumpkinhead, having caught sight of Tip, ambled toward the boy as fast as his wooden legs would go. "Good afternoon, noble parent!" he cried delightedly. "I'm glad to see you are here. That terrible sawhorse ran away with me." "I suspected it," said Tip. "Did you get hurt? Are you cracked at all?" "No, I arrived safely," answered Jack, "and His Majesty has been very kind indeed to me." At this moment the soldier with the green whiskers returned, and the Scarecrow asked, "By the way, who has conquered me?"
"A regiment of girls, gathered from the four corners of the land of Oz," replied the soldier, still pale with fear.
"But where was my standing army at the time?" inquired His Majesty, looking at the soldier gravely.
"Your standing army was running," answered the fellow, honestly, "for no man could face the terrible weapons of the invaders."
"Well," said the Scarecrow, after a moment's thought, I don't mind much the loss of my throne, for it's a tiresome job to rule over the Emerald City, and this crown is so heavy that it makes my head ache. But I hope the conquerors have no intention of injuring me just because I happen to be the king."
"I heard them say," remarked Tip with some hesitation, "that they intend to make a rag carpet out of your outside and stuff their sofa cushions with your inside."
"Then I really am in danger," declared His Majesty positively, "and it will be wise for me to consider a means to escape."
"Where can you go?" asked Jack Pumpkinhead.
"Why, to my friend the Tin Woodman, who rules over the Winkies and calls himself their emperor," was the answer. "I am sure he will protect me."
Tip was looking out the window.
"The palace is surrounded by the enemy," said he. "It's too late to escape. They would soon tear you to pieces."
The Scarecrow sighed.
"In an emergency," he announced, "it is always a good thing to pause and reflect. Please excuse me while I pause and reflect." "But we are also in danger," said the Pumpkinhead anxiously. "If any of these girls understand cooking, my end is not far off." "Nonsense," exclaimed the Scarecrow. "They're too busy to cook, even if they know how." "But should I remain here a prisoner for any length of time," protested Jack, "I'm liable to spoil." "Ah, then you would not be fit to associate with," returned the Scarecrow. "The matter is more serious than I suspected." "You," said the Pumpkinhead gloomily, "are liable to live for many years. My life is necessarily short, so I must take advantage of the few days that remain to me." There. Don't worry," said the Scarecrow, soothingly. "If you'll keep quiet long enough for me to think, I'll try to find some way for us all to escape."
So the others waited in patient silence while the Scarecrow walked to a corner and stood with his face to the wall for a good 5 minutes. At the end of that time, he faced them with a more cheerful expression upon his painted face.
"Where is the sawhorse you rode here?" he asked the Pumpkinhead. "Why, I said he was a jewel, and so your man locked him up in the royal treasury," said Jack.
"It was the only place I could think of, Your Majesty,"
added the soldier, fearing he had made a blunder. "It pleases me very much," said the Scarecrow. "Has the animal been fed?"
"Oh, yes, I give him a heaping peck of sawdust."
"Excellent!" cried the Scarecrow. "Bring the horse here at once."
The soldier hastened away, and presently they heard the clattering of the horse's wooden legs upon the pavement as he was led into the courtyard. His Majesty regarded the steed critically.
"He doesn't seem especially graceful," he remarked musingly, "but I suppose he can run."
"He can indeed," said Tip,
gazing upon the sawhorse admiringly.
"Then, bearing us upon his back, he must make a dash through the ranks of the rebels and carry us to my friend the Tin Woodman," announced the Scarecrow.
"He can't carry 4,
objected Tip.
"No, but he may be induced to carry 3, said His Majesty. "I shall therefore leave my royal army behind, for, from the ease with which he was conquered, I have little confidence in his powers."
"Still, he can't run,"
declared Tip, laughing.
"I expected this blow," said the soldier, sulkily, "but I could bear it. I shall disguise myself by cutting off my lovely green whiskers. And after all, it's no more dangerous to face those reckless girls than to ride this fiery, untamed, wooden horse."
"Perhaps you are right," observed His Majesty, "but for my part, not being a soldier, I am fond of danger. Now, my boy, you must mount first, and please sit as close to the horse's neck as possible."
Tip climbed quickly to his place, and the soldier and Scarecrow managed to hoist the Pumpkinhead to a seat just behind him. There remained so little space for the king that he was liable to fall off as soon as the horse started.
"Fetch a clothesline," said the king to his army, "and tie us all together. Then if one falls off, we will all fall off."
And while the soldier was gone for the clothesline, His Majesty continued,
"It is well for me to be careful, for my very existence is in danger. I have to be as careful as you do,
said Jack. Not exactly, replied the Scarecrow. For if anything happened to me, that would be the end of me. But if anything happened to you, they could use you for seed. The soldier now returned with a long line and tied all three firmly together and, lashing them to the body of the sawhorse, saw that there seemed little danger of their tumbling off. Now, throw open the gates, commanded the Scarecrow, and we will make a dash to liberty or to death. The courtyard in which they were standing was located in the center of the great palace, which surrounded it on all sides. But in one place a passage led to an outer gateway, which the soldier had barred by order of his sovereign. It was through this gateway His Majesty proposed to escape, and the royal army now led the sawhorse along the passage and unbarred the gate, which swung backward with a loud crash.
"Now," said Tip to the horse, "you must save us all. Run as fast as you can for the gate of the city, and don't let anything stop you."
"All right,"
answered the sawhorse gruffly, and dashed away so suddenly that Tip had to gasp for breath and hold firmly to the post he had driven into the creature's neck. Several of the girls who stood outside guarding the palace were knocked over by the sawhorse's mad rush. Others ran screaming out of the way, and only one or two jabbed their knitting needles frantically at the escaping prisoners. Tip got one small prick in his left arm, which smarted for an hour afterward, but the needles had no effect upon the Scarecrow or Jack Pumpkinhead, who never even suspected they were being prodded. As for the sawhorse, he made a wonderful record, upsetting a fruit cart, overturning several meek-looking men, and finally bowling over the new guardian of the gate, a fussy little fat woman appointed by General Jinjur. Nor did the impetuous charger stop then. Once outside the walls of the Emerald City, he dashed along the road to the west with fast and violent leaps that shook the breath out of the boy and filled the Scarecrow with wonder. Jack had ridden at this mad rate once before, so he devoted every effort to holding, with both hands, his pumpkin head upon its stick, enduring meantime the dreadful jolting with the courage of a philosopher. "Slow him up! Slow him up!" shouted the Scarecrow. "My straw is all shaking down into my legs." But Tip had no breath to speak, so the sawhorse continued his wild career unchecked and with unabated speed. Presently they came to the banks of a wide river, and without a pause the wooden steed gave one final leap and launched them all in midair. A second later they were rolling, splashing, and bobbing about in the water, the horse struggling frantically to find a rest for its feet, and its riders first being plunged beneath the rapid current and then floating upon the surface like corks. The journey to the Tin Woodman. Tip was well soaked and dripping water from every angle of his body, but he managed to lean forward and shout in the ear of the sawhorse, "Keep still, you fool! Keep still!" The horse at once ceased struggling and floated calmly upon the surface, its wooden body being as buoyant as a raft.
"What does that word fool mean?"
inquired the horse.
"It is a term of reproach," answered Tip,
somewhat ashamed of the expression.
"I only use it when I'm angry."
"Then it pleases me to be able to call you a fool in return," said the horse. "For I did not make the river, nor put it in our way, so only a term of reproach is fit for one who becomes angry with me for falling into the water."
"That is quite evident," replied Tip.
"So I will acknowledge myself in the wrong."
Then he called out to the Pumpkinhead.
"Are you all right, Jack?"
There was no reply, so the boy called to the king.
"Are you all right, Your Majesty?"
The Scarecrow groaned. "I am all wrong somehow," he said in a weak voice. "How very wet this water is." Tip was bound so tightly by the cord that he could not turn his head to look at his companions, so he said to the sawhorse,
"Paddle with your legs towards the shore."
The horse obeyed, and although their progress was slow, they finally reached the opposite river bank at a place where it was low enough to enable the creature to scramble upon dry land. With some difficulty, the boy managed to get his knife out of his pocket and cut the cords that bound the riders to one another and to the wooden horse. He heard the Scarecrow fall to the ground with a mushy sound, and then he himself quickly dismounted and looked at his friend Jack. The wooden body, with its gorgeous clothing, still sat upright upon the horse's back, but the pumpkin head was gone, and only the sharpened stick that served for a neck was visible. As for the Scarecrow, the straw in his body had shaken down to the jolting and packed itself into the legs and lower part of his body, which appeared very plump and round, while his upper half seemed like an empty sack. Upon his head the Scarecrow still wore the heavy crown, which had been sewed on to prevent his losing. But the head was now so damp and limp that the weight of the gold and jewels sagged forward and crushed the painted face into a mass of wrinkles that made him look exactly like a Japanese pug dog. Tip would have laughed had he not been so anxious about his man Jack. But the Scarecrow, however damaged, was all there, while the pumpkin head that was so necessary to Jack's existence was missing. So the boy seized a long pole that fortunately lay near at hand and anxiously turned again toward the river. Far out upon the waters he sighted the golden hue of the pumpkin, which gently bobbed up and down with the motion of the waves. At that moment it was quite out of Tip's reach, but after a time it floated nearer and still nearer, until the boy was able to reach it with his pole and draw it to the shore. Then he brought it to the top of the bank, carefully wiped the water from its pumpkin face with his handkerchief, and ran with it to Jack and replaced the head upon the man's neck.
"Dear me," were Jack's first words. "What a dreadful experience! I wonder if water is liable to spoil pumpkins."
Tip did not think a reply was necessary, for he knew that the Scarecrow was also in need of his help, so he carefully removed the straw from the king's body and legs and spread it out in the sun to dry. The wet clothing he hung over the body of the sawhorse.
"If water spoils pumpkins," observed Jack, with a deep sigh, "then my days are numbered."
"I've never noticed that water spoils pumpkins," returned Tip, "unless the water happens to be boiling. If your head isn't cracked, my friend, you must be in fairly good condition."
"Oh, my head isn't cracked in the least," declared Jack, more cheerfully.
"Then don't worry," retorted the boy. "Care once killed a cat."
"Then," said Jack seriously, "I am very glad indeed that I am not a cat."
The sun was fast drying their clothing, and Tip stirred up his Majesty's straw so that the warm rays might absorb the moisture and make it as crisp and dry as ever. When this had been accomplished, he stuffed the Scarecrow into symmetrical shape and smoothed out his face so that he wore his usual gay and charming expression. "Thank you very much," said the monarch, brightly, as he walked about and found himself to be well balanced. "There are several distinct advantages in being a Scarecrow, for if one has friends near at hand to repair damages, nothing very serious can happen to you."
"I wonder if hot sunshine is liable to crack pumpkins," said Jack, with an anxious ring in his voice.
"Not at all, not at all," replied the Scarecrow, gaily. "All you need fear, my boy, is old age. When your golden youth has decayed, we shall quickly part company, but you needn't look forward to it. We'll discover the fact ourselves and notify you. But come, let us resume our journey. I am anxious to greet my friend the Tin Woodman." So they remounted the sawhorse, Tip holding to the post and Pumpkinhead clinging to Tip, and the Scarecrow with both arms around the wooden form of Jack. "Go slowly, for now there's no danger of pursuit," said Tip to his steed.
"All right,"
responded the creature in a rather gruff voice.
"Aren't you a little hoarse?"
asked the pumpkin politely. The sawhorse gave an angry prance and rolled one naughty eye backward toward Tip.
"See here," he growled. "Can't you protect me from insult?"
"To be sure," answered Tip soothingly. "I am sure Jack meant no harm, and it will not do for us to quarrel, you know. We must all remain good friends."
"I'll have nothing more to do with that Pumpkinhead," declared the sawhorse viciously. "He loses his head too easily to suit me."
There seeming no fitting reply to this speech,
So for a long time they rode in silence. After a while, the Scarecrow remarked, "This reminds me of old times. It was upon this grassy knoll that I once saved Dorothy from the stinging bees of the Wicked Witch of the West." "Do stinging bees injure pumpkins?" asked Jack, glancing around fearfully. "They are all dead, so it doesn't matter," replied the Scarecrow. "And here's where Nick Chopper destroyed the Wicked Witch's gray wolves." "Who was Nick Chopper?" asked Tip. "That is the name of my friend the Tin Woodman," answered His Majesty. "And here is where the winged monkeys captured and bound us and flew away with little Dorothy," he continued, after they traveled a little way further. "Do winged monkeys ever eat pumpkins?" asked Jack, with a shiver of fear. "I do not know, but you have little cause to worry, for the winged monkeys are now the slaves of Glinda the Good, who owns the golden cap that commands their services," said the Scarecrow reflectively. Then the stuffed monarch became lost in thought, recalling the days of past adventures, and the sawhorse rocked and rolled over the flower-strewn fields and carried its riders swiftly upon their way. Twilight fell by, and then the dark shadows of night, so Tip stopped the horse and they all proceeded to dismount. "I'm tired out," said the boy, yawning wearily, "and the grass is soft and cool. Let us lie down here and sleep until morning." "I can't sleep," said Jack.
"I never do,"
said the Scarecrow.
"I don't even know what sleep is,"
said the sawhorse. "Still, we must have consideration for this poor boy, who is made of flesh and blood and bone and gets tired," suggested the Scarecrow in his usual thoughtful manner. "I remember it was the same way with little Dorothy. We always had to sit through the night while she slept." "I'm sorry," said Tip, meekly, "but I can't help it, and I'm dreadfully hungry, too." "Here is a new danger," remarked Jack gloomily. "I hope you are not fond of eating pumpkins." "Not unless they're stewed and made into pies," answered the boy, laughing. "So have no fears of me, friend Jack."
"What a coward that Pumpkinhead is," said the sawhorse scornfully.
"You might be a coward yourself if you knew you were liable to spoil," retorted Jack angrily.
"There, there," interrupted the Scarecrow. "Don't let us quarrel. We all have our weaknesses, dear friends, so we must strive to be considerate of one another. And since this poor boy is hungry and has nothing to eat, let us all remain quiet and allow him to sleep. For it is said that in sleep a mortal may forget even hunger."
"Thank you," exclaimed Tip gratefully. "Your Majesty is fully as good as you are wise, and that is saying a good deal."
He then stretched himself upon the grass, and, using the stuffed form of the Scarecrow for a pillow, was presently fast asleep. A nickel-plated emperor. Tip awoke soon after dawn, but the Scarecrow had already risen and plucked, with his clumsy fingers, a double handful of ripe berries from some bushes nearby. These the boy ate greedily, finding them an ample breakfast, and afterward the little party resumed its journey. After an hour's ride, they reached the summit of a hill from whence they espied the city of the Winkies, and noted the tall domes of the Emperor's palace rising from the clusters of more modest dwellings. The Scarecrow became greatly animated at this sight and exclaimed, "How delighted I am to see my old friend the Tin Woodman again! I hope that he rules his people more successfully than I have ruled mine."
"Is the Tin Woodman the Emperor of the Winkies?"
asked the horse.
"Yes, indeed. They invited him to rule over them soon after the Wicked Witch was destroyed. And as Nick Chopper has the best heart in all the world, I am sure he has proved an excellent and able emperor." "I thought that the emperor was the title of a person who rules an empire," said Tip. "And the country of Winkies is only a kingdom."
"Don't mention that to the Tin Woodman," exclaimed the Scarecrow earnestly. "You would hurt his feelings terribly. He is a proud man, and he has every reason to be, and it pleases him to be termed emperor rather than king." "I'm sure it makes no difference to me,"
replied the boy. The sawhorse now ambled forward at a pace so fast that its riders had hard work to stick upon its back, so there was little further conversation until they drew up beside the palace steps. An aged Winky, dressed in a uniform of silver cloth, came forward to assist them to alight. Said the Scarecrow to this personage, "Show us at once to your master, the Emperor." The man looked from one to another of the party in an embarrassed way and finally answered, "I fear I must ask you to wait for a time. The Emperor's not receiving this morning." "How is that?" inquired the Scarecrow, anxiously. "I hope nothing has happened to him." "Oh, no, nothing serious," returned the man. "But this is His Majesty's day for being polished, and just now his august appearance is thickly smeared with putz pomade." "Oh, I see," cried the Scarecrow, greatly reassured. "My friend was ever inclined to be a dandy, and I suppose he is now more proud than ever of his personal appearance." "He is indeed," said the man with a polite bow. "Our mighty Emperor has lately caused himself to be nickel-plated." "Good gracious!" the Scarecrow exclaimed at hearing this. "If his wit bears the same polish, how sparkling it must be! But show us in. I'm sure the Emperor will receive us, even in his present state." "The Emperor's state is always magnificent," said the man, "but I will venture to tell him of your arrival, and will receive his commands concerning you." So the party followed the servant into a splendid anteroom, and the sawhorse ambled awkwardly after them, having no knowledge that a horse might be expected to remain outside. The travelers were at first somewhat awed by their surroundings, and even the Scarecrow seemed impressed as he examined the rich hangings of silver cloth caught up into knots and fastened with tiny silver axes. Upon a handsome center table stood a large silver oil can, richly engraved with scenes from the past adventurers of the Tin Woodman, Dorothy, the Cowardly Lion, and the Scarecrow, the lines of the engraving being traced upon the silver in yellow gold. On the walls hung several portraits, that of the Scarecrow seeming to be the most prominent and carefully executed, while the large painting of the famous Wizard of Oz, in act of presenting the Tin Woodman with a heart, covered almost one entire end of the room. While the visitors gazed at these things in silent admiration, they suddenly heard a loud voice in the next room exclaim, "Well, well, well, what a great surprise!" And then the door burst open, and Nick Chopper rushed into their midst and caught the Scarecrow in a close and loving embrace that creased him into many folds and wrinkles. "My dear old friend, my noble comrade," cried the Tin Woodman joyfully. "How delighted I am to meet you once again." Then he released the Scarecrow and held him at arm's length while he surveyed the beloved painted features. But alas, the face of the Scarecrow and many portions of his body bore great blotches of putz pomade, for the Tin Man, in his eagerness to welcome his friend, had quite forgotten the condition of his toilet, and had rubbed the thick coating of paste from his own body to that of his comrade. "Dear me," said the Scarecrow dolefully, "what a mess I'm in." "Never mind, my friend," returned the Tin Woodman. "I'll send you to my imperial laundry, and you'll come out as good as new." "Won't I be mangled?" asked the Scarecrow. "No, indeed. But tell me, how come your Majesty's here? And who are your companions?" The Scarecrow, with great politeness, introduced Tip and Jack Pumpkinhead, and the latter personage seemed to interest the Tin Woodman greatly. "You're not very substantial, I must admit," said the Emperor, "but you are certainly unusual, and therefore worthy to become a member of our select society." "I thank your Majesty," said Jack humbly. "I hope you're enjoying a good health?" continued the Woodman. "At present, yes," replied the Pumpkinhead, with a sigh. "But I'm in constant terror of the day when I shall spoil." "Nonsense," said the Emperor, but in a kindly, sympathetic tone. "Do not, I beg of you, dampen today's sun with the showers of tomorrow, for before your head has time to spoil, you can have it canned, and in that way it may be preserved indefinitely." Tip, during this conversation, was looking at the woodman with undisguised amazement, and noticed that the celebrated emperor of the Winkies was composed entirely of pieces of tin, neatly soldered and riveted together in the form of a man. He rattled and clanked a little as he moved, but in the main he seemed to be most cleverly constructed, and his appearance was only marred by the thick coating of polishing paste that covered him from head to foot. The boy's intent gaze caused the Tin Woodman to remember that he was not in the most presentable condition, so he begged his friends to excuse him while he retired to his private apartment and allowed his servants to polish him. This was accomplished in a short time, and when the Emperor returned, his nickel-plated body shone so magnificently that the Scarecrow heartily congratulated him on his improved appearance.
Nickel plate was, I confess, a happy thought, said Nick, and it was more the more necessary because I had had somewhat scratched during my adventurous experiences. You'll observe this engraved star upon my left breast. It not only indicates where my excellent heart lies, but covers very neatly the patch made by the wonderful wizard when he placed that valued organ in my breast with his own skillful hands.
Is your heart, then, a hand organ? Asked the Pumpkinhead, curiously.
By no means,
responded the Emperor, with dignity.
It is, I am convinced, a strictly orthodox heart, although somewhat larger and warmer than most people possess.
Then he turned to the Scarecrow and asked,
Are your subjects happy and contented, my dear friend?
I cannot say, was the reply, for the girls of Oz have risen in revolt and driven me out of the Emerald City.
Great goodness! Cried the Tin Woodman. What a calamity! They surely did not complain of your wise and gracious rule.
No, but they say it is a poor rule that don't work both ways, answered the Scarecrow. And the females are also of the opinion that men have ruled the land long enough, so they have captured my city, robbed the treasury of all its jewels, and are running things to suit themselves.
Dear me! What an extraordinary idea! Cried the Emperor, who was both shocked and surprised.
And I heard some of them say, said Tip, that they intend to march here and capture the castle and city of the Tin Woodman.
Ah, we must not give them time to do that, said the Emperor quickly. We will go at once and recapture the Emerald City and place the Scarecrow again upon his throne.
I was sure you would help me, remarked the Scarecrow in a pleased voice. How large an army can you assemble?
We do not need an army, replied the Woodman. We four, with the aid of my gleaming axe, are enough to strike terror into the hearts of the rebels.
We 5, corrected the Pumpkinhead.
5?
Yes, the Sawhorse is brave and fearless, answered Jack, forgetting his recent quarrel with the quadruped. The Tin Woodman looked around him in a puzzled way, for the Sawhorse had, up until now, remained quietly standing in a corner where the Emperor had not noticed him. Tip immediately called the odd-looking creature to them, and it approached so awkwardly that it nearly upset the beautiful center table and the engraved oil can.
I begin to think,
remarked the Tin Woodman, as he looked earnestly at the Sawhorse,
that wonders will never cease. How came this creature alive?
I did it with the magic powder, modestly asserted the boy, and the Sawhorse has been very useful to us. He enabled us to escape the rebels, added the Scarecrow.
Then we must surely accept him as a comrade, declared the Emperor. A live Sawhorse is a distinct novelty, should prove an interesting study. Does he know anything?
Well, I cannot claim any great experiences in life, Sawhorse answered for himself. But I seem to learn very quickly, and it often occurs to me that I know more than any of those around me.
Perhaps you do, said the Emperor, for experience does not always mean wisdom, but time is precious just now, so let us quickly make preparations to start upon our journey.
The Emperor called his Lord High Chancellor and instructed him how to run the kingdom during his absence. Meanwhile, the Scarecrow was taken apart, and the painted sack that served him for a head was carefully laundered and restuffed with the brains originally given him by the great wizard. His clothes were also cleaned and pressed by the imperial tailors,
and his crown polished and again sewed upon his head, for the Tin Woodman insisted he should not renounce this badge of royalty. The Scarecrow now presented a very respectable appearance, and although in no way addicted to vanity, he was quite pleased with himself and strutted a trifle as he walked. While this was being done, Tip mended the wooden limbs of Jack Pumpkinhead and made them stronger than before, and the Sawhorse was also inspected to see if he was in good working order. Then, bright and early the next morning, they set out upon the journey to the Emerald City, the Tin Woodman bearing upon his shoulder a gleaming axe and leading the way, while the Pumpkinhead rode upon the Sawhorse, and Tip and Scarecrow walked upon either side to make sure that he didn't fall off or become damaged.
Mr. H.M. Woggle-Bug, T.E. Now, General Jinjur, who you will remember commanded the army of Revolt, was rendered very uneasy by the escape of the Scarecrow from the Emerald City. She feared, and with good reason, that if His Majesty and the Tin Woodman joined forces, it would mean danger to her and her entire army, for the people of Oz had not yet forgotten the deeds of these famous heroes who had passed successfully through so many startling adventures. So Jinjur sent post-haste for old Mombi the witch, and promised her large rewards if she would come to the assistance of the rebel army. Mombi was furious at the trick Tip had played upon her, as well as at his escape and the theft of the precious Powder of Life, so she needed no urging to induce her to travel to the Emerald City to assist Jinjur in defeating the Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman, who made Tip one of their friends. Mombi had no sooner arrived at the royal palace than she discovered, by means of her secret magic, that the adventurers were starting upon their journey to the Emerald City. So she retired to a small room high up in the tower and locked herself in while she practiced such arts as she could command to prevent the return of the Scarecrow and his companions. That was why the Tin Woodman presently stopped and said,
Something very curious has happened. I ought to know by heart in every step of this journey, yet I fear we have already lost our way.
That is quite impossible, protested the Scarecrow. Why do you think, my dear friend, that we have gone astray?
Why, here before us is a great field of sunflowers, and I never saw this field before in all my life.
At these words, they all looked around, only to find that they were indeed surrounded by a field of tall stalks, every stalk bearing at its top a gigantic sunflower. And not only were these flowers almost blinding in their vivid hues of red and gold, but each one whirled round upon its stalk like a miniature windmill, completely dazzling the vision of the beholders, and so mystifying them that they knew not which way to turn.
"It's witchcraft!"
exclaimed Tip. While they paused, hesitating and wondering, the Tin Woodman uttered a cry of impatience and advanced with swinging axe to cut the stalks before him. But now the sunflowers suddenly stopped their rapid whirling, and the travelers plainly saw a girl's face appear in the center of each flower. These lovely faces looked upon the astonished band with mocking smiles, and then burst into a chorus of merry laughter at the dismay their appearance caused.
"Stop! Stop!" cried Tip, seizing the Wooden's arms. "They're alive! They're girls!"
At that moment the flowers began whirling again, and the faces faded away and were lost in rapid revolutions. The Tin Woodman dropped his axe and sat down upon the ground.
"It would be heartless to chop down these pretty creatures," said he despondently, "and yet I do not know how else we can proceed upon our way."
"They looked to me strangely like the faces of the army of Revolt," mused the Scarecrow, "but I cannot conceive how the girls could have followed us here so quickly."
"I believe it's magic," said Tip positively, "and that someone is playing a trick upon us. I've known old Mombi to do things like that before. Probably it's nothing more than an illusion, and there are no sunflowers here at all." "Well, then let us shut our eyes and walk forward," suggested the Woodman.
"Excuse me," replied the Scarecrow. "My eyes are not painted to shut, because you happen to have tin eyelids, you must not imagine we are all built in the same way."
"And the eyes of the sawhorse are not eyes," said Jack, leaning forward to examine them.
"Nevertheless, you must ride quickly forward," commanded Tip, "and we will follow after you and so try to escape. My eyes are already so dazzled that I can barely see."
So the Pumpkinhead rode boldly forward, and Tip grasped the stub tail of the sawhorse and followed with closed eyes. The Scarecrow and the Tin Woodman brought up the rear, and before they had gone many yards, a joyful shout from Jack announced that the way was clear before them. Then all paused to look backward, but not a trace of the field of sunflowers remained. More cheerfully, now they proceeded upon their journey, but old Mombi had so changed the appearance of the landscape that they would surely have been lost had not the Scarecrow wisely concluded to take their direction from the sun, for no witchcraft could change the course of the sun, and it was therefore a safe guide. However, other difficulties lay before them. The sawhorse stepped into a rabbit hole and fell to the ground. The Pumpkinhead was pitched high into the air, and his history would probably have ended at that exact moment had not the Tin Woodman skillfully caught the pumpkin as it descended and saved it from injury. Tip soon had it fitted to the neck again and replaced Jack upon his feet, but the sawhorse did not escape so easily, for when his leg was pulled from the rabbit hole, it was found to be broken short off and must be replaced or repaired before he could go a step farther. "This is quite serious," said the Tin Woodman. "If there were trees near, I might soon manufacture another leg for this animal, but I cannot even see a shrub for miles around."
"And there are neither fences nor houses in this part of the land of Oz," said the Scarecrow, disconsolately. "Then what shall we do?" inquired the boy. "I suppose I must start my brains working," replied His Majesty the Scarecrow, "for experience has taught me that I can do anything if I but take the time to think it out." "Let us all think," said Tip, "and perhaps we shall find a way to repair the sawhorse." So they sat in a row upon the grass and began to think, while the sawhorse occupied itself by gazing curiously upon its broken limb.
"Does it hurt?"
asked the Tin Woodman, in a soft, sympathetic voice.
"Not in the least," returned the sawhorse, "but my pride is injured to find that my anatomy is so brittle."
For a time the little group remained in silent thought. Presently the Tin Woodman raised his head and looked over the fields.
"What sort of creature is that which approaches us?"
he asked wonderingly. The others followed his gaze and discovered coming toward them the most extraordinary object they had ever beheld. It advanced quickly and noiselessly over the soft grass, and in a few minutes stood before the adventurers and regarded them with an astonishment equal to their own. The Scarecrow was calm under all circumstances. "Good morning," he said, politely. The stranger removed his hat with a flourish, bowed very low, and then responded, "Good morning, one and all. I hope you are, as an aggregation, enjoying excellent health. Permit me to present my card." With this courteous speech, it extended a card toward the Scarecrow, who accepted it, turned it over, and handled it with a shake of his head to Tip. The boy read aloud, "Mr. H.M. Woggle-Bug, T.E." "Dear me!" ejaculated the Pumpkinhead, staring somewhat intently.
"How very peculiar,"
said the Tin Woodman. Tip's eyes were round and wondering, and the sawhorse uttered a sigh and turned away its head. "Are you really a Woggle-Bug?" inquired the Scarecrow.
"Most certainly, dear sir,"
answered the stranger briskly.
"Is not my name upon the card?"
"It is," said the Scarecrow. "But may I ask what H.M. stands for?"
"H.M. means highly magnified,"
returned the Woggle-Bug proudly. "Oh, I see." The Scarecrow viewed the stranger critically. "Are you, in truth, highly magnified?"
"Sir,"
said the Woggle-Bug,
I take you for a gentleman of judgment and discernment. Does it not occur to you that I am several thousand times greater than any Woggle-Bug you ever saw before? Therefore, it is plainly evident that I am highly magnified, and there is no good reason why you should doubt the fact.
Pardon me, returned the Scarecrow. My brains are slightly mixed since I was last laundered. Would it be improper for me to ask also what the T.E. at the end of your name stands for?
Those letters express my degree, answered the Woggle-Bug, with a condescending smile. To be more explicit, the initials mean that I am thoroughly educated.
Oh, said the Scarecrow, much relieved. Tip had not yet taken his eyes off this wonderful personage. What he saw was a great, round, bug-like body supported on two slender legs which ended in delicate feet, toes curling upward. The body of the Woggle-Bug was rather flat, and judging from what could be seen of it, was of a glistening dark brown color upon the back, while the front was striped with alternating bands of light brown and white, blending together at the edges. Its arms were fully as slender as its legs, and upon a rather long neck was perched its head, not unlike the head of a man, except its nose ended in a curling antenna, or feeler, and its ears from the upper points bore antennae that decorated the sides of its head like two miniature curling pigtails. It must be admitted that the round black eyes were rather bulging in appearance, but the expression upon the Woggle-Bug's face was by no means unpleasant. For dress, the insect wore a dark blue swallowtail coat with a yellow silk lining and a flower in the buttonhole, a vest of white duck that stretched tightly across the wide body, knickerbockers of fawn-colored plush, fastened at the knees with gilt buckles, and perched upon its small head was jauntily set a tall silk hat. Standing upright before our amazed friends, the Woggle-Bug appeared to be fully as tall as the Tin Woodman, and surely no bug in all the land of Oz had ever before attained so enormous a size. "I confess," said the Scarecrow, "that your abrupt appearance has caused me surprise, and no doubt has startled my companions. I hope, however, that this circumstance will not distress you. We shall probably get used to you in time."
"Do not apologize, I beg of you," returned the Woggle-Bug earnestly. "It affords me great pleasure to surprise people, for surely I cannot be classified with ordinary insects, and am entitled to both curiosity and admiration from those I meet."
"You are, indeed," agreed His Majesty.
"If you will permit me to sit myself in your august company," continued the stranger, "I will gladly relate my history, so that you will be better able to comprehend my unusual, may I say remarkable, appearance."
"Ye may say what you please," answered the Tin Woodman briefly.
So the Woggle-Bug sat down upon the grass facing the little group of wonders and told them the following story. A highly magnified history.
"It is but an honest that I should acknowledge at the beginning of my recital that I was born an ordinary Woggle-Bug," began the creature in a frank and friendly tone. "Knowing no better, I used my arms as well as my legs for walking, and crawled under the edges of stones or hid among the roots of grasses, with no thought beyond finding a few insects smaller than myself to feed upon. The chill nights rendered me stiff and motionless, for I wore no clothing, but each morning the warm rays of the sun gave me new life and restored me to activity. A horrible existence is this, but you must remember it is the regular ordained existence of Woggle-Bugs, as well as many other tiny creatures that inhabit the earth. But destiny had singled me out, humble though I was, for a grander fate. One day I crawled near to a country schoolhouse, and my curiosity being excited by a monotonous hum of the students within, I made bold to enter and creep along a crack between two boards until I reached the far end, where, in front of a hearth of glowing embers, sat the master at his desk. No one noticed so small a creature as a Woggle-Bug, and when I found that the earth was even warmer and more comfortable than the sunshine, I resolved to establish my future home beside it. So I found a charming nest between two bricks and hid myself therein for many months. Professor Know-it-all is doubtless the most famous scholar in the land of Oz, and after a few days I began to listen to the lectures and discourses he gave his pupils. Not one of them was more attentive than the humble, unnoticed Woggle-Bug, and I acquired in this way a fund of knowledge that I will myself confess is simply marvelous. That is why I place T.E. thoroughly educated upon my cards, for my greatest pride lies in the fact that the world cannot produce another Woggle-Bug with a 10th part of my own culture and erudition.
I do not blame you, said the Scarecrow. Education is a thing to be proud of. I'm educated myself. The mess of brains given me by the great wizard is considered by my friends to be unexcelled.
Nevertheless, interrupted the Tin Woodman, a good heart is, I believe, much more desirable than education or brains.
To me, said the Sawhorse, a good leg is more desirable than either.
Could seeds be considered in the light of brains? Inquired the Pumpkinhead abruptly. Keep quiet, commanded Tip sternly. Very well, dear father, answered the obedient Jack. The Woggle-Bug listened patiently, even respectfully, to these remarks, and then resumed his story. I must have lived fully 3 years in that secluded schoolhouse hearth, said he, drinking thirstily of the ever-flowing fount of limpid knowledge before me. Quite poetical, commented the Scarecrow, nodding his head approvingly. But one day, continued the Bug, a marvelous circumstance occurred that altered my very existence and brought me to my present pinnacle of greatness. The Professor discovered me in the act of crawling across the hearth, and before I could escape, he had caught me between his thumb and forefinger. My dear children, said he, I have captured a Woggle-Bug, a very rare and interesting specimen. Do any of you know what a Woggle-Bug is? No, yelled the scholars in chorus. Then, said the Professor, I will get out my famous magnifying glass and throw the insect upon a screen in a highly magnified condition, that you may all study carefully its peculiar construction and become acquainted with its habits and manners of life. He then brought from a cupboard a most curious instrument, and before I could realize what has happened, I found myself thrown upon the screen in a highly magnified state, even as you now behold me. The students stood up on their stools and craned their heads forward to get a better view of me, and 2 girls jumped upon the sill of an open window where they could see more plainly. Behold, cried the Professor in a loud voice, this highly magnified Woggle-Bug, one of the most curious insects in existence. Being thoroughly educated and knowing what is required of a cultured gentleman, at this juncture I stood upright, and placing my hands upon my bosom, made a very polite bow. My action, being unexpected, must have startled them, for one of the little girls perched upon the window-sill gave a scream, and fell backwards out of the window, drawing her companion with her as she disappeared. The Professor uttered a cry of horror, and rushed away through the door to see if the poor children were injured by the fall. The scholars followed him after in a wild mob, and I was left alone in the schoolroom, still in a highly magnified state, and free to do as I pleased. It immediately occurred to me that this was a good opportunity to escape. I was proud of my great size, and realized that now I could safely travel anywhere in the world, while my superior culture would make me a fit associate for the most learned person I might chance to meet. So while the professor picked the little girls, who were more frightened than hurt, off the ground, and the pupils clustered around him closely grouped, I calmly walked out of the schoolhouse, turned a corner, and escaped unnoticed to a grove of trees that stood near.
"Wonderful!" exclaimed the Pumpkinhead admiringly.
It was, indeed, agreed the Woggle-Bug. I have never ceased to congratulate myself for escaping while I was highly magnified, for even my excessive knowledge would have proved of little use to me if I had remained a tiny, insignificant insect.
"I didn't know before," said Tip, looking at the Woggle-Bug with a puzzled expression, "that insects wore clothes."
"Nor do they, in their natural state," returned the stranger. "But in the course of my wanderings I have had the good fortune to save the 9th life of a tailor, tailors having, like cats, 9 lives, as you probably know. The fellow was exceedingly grateful, for had he lost that 9th life, it would have been the end of him, so he begged permission to furnish me with a stylish costume I now wear. It fits very nicely, does it not?"
said the Woggle-Bug, stood up, turned himself around slowly, that all might examine his person. "He must have been a good tailor," said the Scarecrow, somewhat enviously.
"He is a good-hearted tailor, at any rate," observed Nick Chopper.
"But where were you going when you met us?" Tip asked the Woggle-Bug.
"Nowhere in particular," was the reply, "although it is my intention soon to visit the Emerald City and arrange to give a course of lectures to select audiences on the advantages of magnification." "We're bound for the Emerald City now," said the Tin Woodman. "So, if it pleases you to do so, you're welcome to travel in our company."
The Woggle-Bug bowed with profound grace.
"It will give me great pleasure," said he, "to accept your kind invitation, for nowhere in the land of Oz could I hope to meet with so congenial a company."
"That is true," acknowledged the Pumpkinhead. "We are quite as congenial as flies and honey."
"But, pardon me if I seem inquisitive, are you not all rather unusual?"
asked the Woggle-Bug, looking from one to another with unconcealed interest. "Not more so than yourself," answered the Scarecrow. "Everything in life is unusual until you get accustomed to it."
"What rare philosophy!"
exclaimed the Woggle-Bug admiringly. "Yes, my brains are working well today," admitted the Scarecrow, an accent of pride in his voice.
"Then, if you are sufficiently rested and refreshed, let us bend our steps towards the Emerald City," suggested the Magnified One.
"We can't," said Tip. "The Sawhorse has broken a leg, so we can't bend his steps, and there's no wood around to make him a new limb for him. And we can't leave a horse behind because the Pumpkinhead is so stiff in his joints that he has to ride."
"How very unfortunate," cried the Woggle-Bug.
Then he looked the party over carefully and said,
"If the Pumpkinhead is to ride, why not use one of his legs to make a leg for the horse that carries him? I judge that both are made of wood."
"Now, this is what I call real cleverness," said the Scarecrow approvingly. "I wonder my brains did not think of that long ago. Get to work, my dear Nick, and fit the Pumpkinhead's leg to the Sawhorse." Jack was not especially pleased with this idea, but he submitted to having his left leg amputated by the Tin Woodman and whittled down to fit the left leg of the Sawhorse. Nor was the Sawhorse especially pleased with the operation either, for he growled a good deal about being butchered, as he called it, and afterward declared that the new leg was a disgrace to a respectable Sawhorse.
"I beg you to be more careful in your speech," said the Pumpkinhead sharply. "Remember, if you please, that it is my leg you are abusing."
"I cannot forget it,"
retorted the Sawhorse.
For it is quite as flimsy as the rest of your person.
Flimsy? Me flimsy? Cried Jack, in a rage. How dare you call me flimsy?
Because you're built as absurdly as a jumping jack,
sneered the horse, rolling his knotty eyes in a vicious manner.
Even your head won't stay straight, and you can never tell whether you're looking backwards or forwards.
Friends, I entreat you not to quarrel, pleaded the Tin Woodman anxiously. As a matter of fact, we are none of us above criticism, so let us bear with each other's faults. An excellent suggestion, said the Woggle-Bug approvingly. You must have an excellent heart, my metallic friend. I have, returned Nick, well pleased. My heart is quite the best part of me, but now let us start upon our journey. They perched the one-legged Pumpkinhead upon the Sawhorse and tied him to his seat with cords so that he could not possibly fall off. And then, following the lead of the Scarecrow, they all advanced in the direction of the Emerald City. Old Mombi indulges in witchcraft. They soon discovered that the Sawhorse limped, for his new leg was a trifle too long, so they were obliged to halt while the Tin Woodman chopped it down with his axe, after which the wooden steed paced along more comfortably. But the Sawhorse was not entirely satisfied, even yet.
It's a shame that I broke my other leg,
he growled. On the contrary, airily remarked the Woggle-Bug, who was walking alongside. You should consider the accident most fortunate, for a horse is never of much use until he has been broken. I beg your pardon, said Tip, rather provoked, for he felt a warm interest in both the Sawhorse and the man Jack. But permit me to say that your joke is a poor one, and as old as it is poor. Still, it is a joke, declared the Woggle-Bug firmly, and a joke derived from a play upon words is considered among educated people to be eminently proper. What does that mean? Inquired the Pumpkinhead, stupidly. It means, my dear friend, explained the Woggle-Bug, that our language contains many words having a double meaning, and that to pronounce a joke that allows both meanings of a certain word proves the joker a person of culture and refinement who has, moreover, a thorough command of the language. I don't believe that, said Tip plainly. Anybody can make a pun. Not so, rejoined the Woggle-Bug stiffly. It requires education of a high order. Are you educated, young sir? Not especially, admitted Tip. Then you cannot judge the matter. I myself am thoroughly educated, and I say that puns display genius. For instance, were I to ride upon the Sawhorse, he would not only be an animal, he would become an equipage, for he would then be a horse and buggy. At this, the Scarecrow gave a gasp, and the Tin Woodman stopped short and looked reproachfully at the Woggle-Bug. At the same time, the Sawhorse loudly snorted his derision, and even the Pumpkinhead put his hand to hide the smile which, because it was carved upon his face, he could not change to a frown. But the Woggle-Bug strutted along as if he had made some brilliant remark, and the Scarecrow was obliged to say, I have heard, my dear friend, that a person can become overeducated, and although I have a high respect for brains, no matter how they may be arranged or classified, I begin to suspect that yours are slightly tangled. In any event, I must beg you to restrain your superior education while in our society. We're not very particular, added the Tin Woodman, and we are exceedingly kind-hearted, but if your superior culture gets leaky again... He did not complete the sentence, but he twirled his gleaming axe so carelessly that the Woggle-Bug looked frightened and shrank away to a safe distance. The others marched on in silence, and the highly magnified one, after a period of deep thought, said in a humble voice, I will endeavor to restrain myself. That is all we can expect, returned the Scarecrow pleasantly, and good nature being thus happily restored to the party, they proceeded upon their way. When they again stopped to allow Tip to rest, the boy being the only one that seemed to tire,
The Tin Woodman noticed many small round holes in the grassy meadow.
"This must be the village of the field mice," he said to the Scarecrow. "I wonder if my old friend, the Queen of the Mice, is in this neighborhood."
"If she is, she may be of great service to us," answered the Scarecrow, who was impressed by a sudden thought. "See if you can call her, my dear Nick." So the Tin Woodman blew a shrill note upon a silver whistle that hung around his neck, and presently a tiny gray mouse popped up from a near hole and advanced fearlessly toward them. For the Tin Woodman had once saved her life, and the Queen of the Field Mice knew he was to be trusted.
"Good day, Your Majesty," said Nick, politely addressing the mouse. "I trust you are enjoying good health."
Thank you, I am quite well,
answered the Queen demurely, and she sat up and displayed the tiny golden crown upon her head.
Can I do anything to assist my old friends?
"You can indeed," replied the Scarecrow eagerly. "Let me, I entreat you, take a dozen of your subjects with me to Emerald City."
Will they be injured in any way?
asked the Queen, doubtfully. "I think not," replied the Scarecrow. "I will carry them hidden in the straw which stuffs my body, and when I give them the signal by unbuttoning my jacket, they have only to rush out and scamper home again as fast as they can. By doing this, they will assist me to regain my throne, which the army of Revolt has taken from me."
In that case,
said the Queen,
I will not refuse your request. Whenever you are ready, I will call 12 of my most intelligent subjects.
"I am ready now," returned the Scarecrow. Then he lay flat upon the ground and unbuttoned his jacket, displaying the mass of straw with which he was stuffed. The Queen uttered a little piping call, and in an instant a dozen pretty field mice had emerged from their holes and stood before their ruler, awaiting her orders. What the Queen said to them, none of our travelers could understand, for it was in the mouse language, but the field mice obeyed without hesitation, running one after the other to the Scarecrow and hiding themselves in the straw of his breast. When all of the 12 mice had thus concealed themselves, the Scarecrow buttoned his jacket securely and then arose and thanked the Queen for her kindness.
"One more thing you might do to serve us," suggested the Tin Woodman. "That's to run ahead and show us the way to Emerald City, for some enemy is evidently trying to prevent us from reaching it."
I will do that gladly,
returned the Queen.
Are you ready?
The Tin Woodman looked at Tip. "I'm rested," said the boy. "Let us start." Then they resumed their journey, the little gray Queen of the Field Mice running swiftly ahead and then pausing until the travelers drew near, when she would dart away again. Without this unerring guide, the Scarecrow and his comrades might never have gained the Emerald City, for many were the obstacles thrown in their way by the arts of old Mombi. Yet not one of the obstacles really existed. All were cleverly contrived deceptions, for when they came to the banks of a rushing river that threatened to bar their way, the little Queen kept steadily on, passing through the seeming flood in safety, and our travelers followed her without encountering a single drop of water. Again, a high wall of granite towered over above their heads and opposed their advance, but the gray field mouse walked straight through it, and the others did the same, the wall melting into mist as they passed it. Afterward, when they stopped for a moment to allow Tip to rest, they saw 40 roads branching off from their feet in 40 different directions. And soon these 40 roads began whirling around like a mighty wheel, first in one direction and then in another, completely bewildering their vision. But the Queen called for them to follow her and darted off in a straight line, and when they'd gone a few paces, the whirling pathways vanished and were seen no more. Mombi's last trick was the most fearful of all. She sent a sheet of crackling flame rushing over the meadow to consume them, and for the first time the Scarecrow became afraid and turned to fly. "If that fire reaches me, I will be gone in no time," said he, trembling until his straw rattled. "It's the most dangerous thing I have ever encountered."
"I'm off too,"
cried the Sawhorse, turning and prancing with agitation.
"For my wood is so dry it would burn like kindlings."
"Is fire dangerous to pumpkins?" asked Jack fearfully.
"You'll be baked like a tot, and so will I," answered the Woggle-Bug, getting down on all fours so he could run the faster. But the Tin Woodman, having no fear of fire, averted the stampede by a few sensible words. "Look at the field mouse," he shouted. "Fire does not burn her in the least. In fact, it's no fire at all, but only a deception." Indeed, to watch the little queen march calmly through the advancing flames restored courage to every member of the party, and they followed her without being even scorched. "This is surely a most extraordinary adventure," said the Woggle-Bug, who was greatly amazed, "for it upsets all the natural laws that I heard Professor Know-it-all teach in the schoolhouse."
"Of course it does," said the Scarecrow wisely. "All magic is unnatural, and for that reason is to be feared and avoided. But I see before us the gates of the Emerald City, so I imagine we have now overcome all the magical obstacles that seemed to oppose us." Indeed, the walls of the city were plainly visible, and the Queen of the Field Mice, who had guided them so faithfully, came near to bid them goodbye.
"We are very grateful to your Majesty for her kind assistance," said the Tin Woodman, bowing before the pretty creature.
"I am always pleased to be of service to my friends,"
answered the Queen, and in a flash she had darted away upon her journey home.